Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you incredible tales of resilience, transformation, and the power of unity. Today, we dive into the story of the Phoenix Riders, a group that began as a troubled motorcycle gang but evolved into a global force for good. From a small-town diner confrontation to rebuilding communities worldwide, their journey proves that redemption is possible and true strength lies in helping others. Don't miss this inspiring narrative of second chances and enduring hope. Subscribe to Life Stories now and join us as we begin today's unforgettable chapter of courage and change. It was a quiet Thursday evening in Jackson, Tennessee. The Riverside Diner, a staple of the small town, hummed with its usual rhythm, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the buttery scent of griddled pancakes as families, truckers, and regulars settled into their favorite booths. Among them was Captain Sarah Mitchell, a former Force Recon Marine who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. At 38, Sarah had returned to Jackson not for rest, but to rebuild her life and give back to the community through her work with local veterans. Her corner booth, nestled by the large window overlooking the main street, had become her sanctuary. Sarah sipped her coffee, its warmth a contrast to the cool evening air slipping in through the cracks of the old diner door. The purple heart pin on her denim jacket caught the last rays of the setting sun, though she rarely spoke of what it signified. For Sarah, the past was a foundation, not a monument, and tonight she was simply another patron enjoying a brief moment of peace. "Here's your usual, Sarah." Betty, the diner's longtime waitress, said with a warm smile as she refilled her cup. Betty had known Sarah since childhood and had seen her grow from a determined teenager to a formidable Marine. "How's the Veterans Center coming along?" "Making progress," Sarah replied, her tone steady but softened by a small smile. "We've got 3 new vets starting computer training this week. It's good to see them finding their footing again." Betty nodded, her eyes briefly flicking to the pin on Sarah's jacket. "You know, for all the time I've known you, I still can't believe you never told me you were a Marine captain. Some things are better left quiet," Sarah replied, her gaze drifting out the window. "Besides, that part of my life is behind me." Before Betty could respond, the jangle of the diner bell announced new arrivals. The room stilled as 5 men entered, their heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor. They were members of the Iron Vultures, a notorious biker gang known for causing trouble wherever they went. Their leader, Jake Razor Thompson, was a hulking man whose leather jacket bore patches that made it clear he thrived on intimidation. His presence carried a weight that seemed to press down on the room. "Looks like we found ourselves a cozy little spot," Razor said, his voice cutting through the diner's soft murmur. His eyes swept the room, landing on a young waitress clearing a nearby table. He grinned, knocking over a glass of water as he leaned toward her. "Oops. Looks like you've got some cleaning up to do, sweetheart." The young woman, barely out of her teens, froze, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. Razor's companions laughed, their coarse voices filling the room. A mother seated with her 2 young children at a nearby booth began gathering her things, her movements deliberate and cautious, hoping not to draw attention. Sarah watched the scene unfold through the window's reflection. Her tactical mind assessed every detail, their positions, their weight distribution, the way one man kept his hand near his jacket pocket. It wasn't her fight, she reminded herself. Not yet. Then Razor turned toward the mother and her children, his grin widening as the youngest whimpered softly. "What's the matter, kid? Never seen a real man before?" That was enough. "The lady and her children are leaving," Sarah said, her voice calm yet commanding. The words cut through the air, silencing the biker's laughter. Slowly, Razor turned to face her. Well, what do we have here?" he sneered. "Someone who thinks she's in charge. Who are you, sweetheart?" Sarah stood, her movements unhurried but deliberate. "Captain Sarah Mitchell." United States Marine Corps. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Now, are you going to step aside? Or do I need to teach you some manners? The room held its breath as Razor's bravado faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Marine Corps. Huh. You expect me to believe that? You don't have to believe it, Sarah replied, her tone unwavering. But you do need to let these people leave. For a moment, the tension teetered on the edge of escalation. Then one of Razor's men made the mistake of lunging toward Sarah, attempting to grab her arm. With fluid precision, she sidestepped, using his momentum to send him sprawling into a nearby booth. Dishes clattered, and the room erupted into gasps. Razor swung next, a brass-knuckled fist aimed wide. Sarah ducked, her training taking over as she swept his legs from under him. The massive man hit the floor with a crash that reverberated through the diner. "You're going to regret this," he growled, blood trickling from his lip. "Maybe," Sarah replied evenly, "but not as much as you're going to regret underestimating a Marine." The confrontation ended as quickly as it began. Razor's remaining men hesitated, their confidence shaken. By the time police sirens wailed in the distance, the bikers were retreating, muttering under their breath. Razor, nursing his injuries, locked eyes with Sarah one last time, a strange mix of anger and reluctant respect flickering there. As the door swung shut behind them, applause broke out among the patrons. Betty placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of Sarah, her eyes glistening with pride. "That was something, honey." Sarah simply nodded, taking a steadying sip. "Just doing my job, Betty. Just doing my job." What none of them knew yet was that this single act of courage would ignite a movement that would ripple far beyond the small town of Jackson, transforming not only the lives of those bikers but an entire community and, eventually, the world. In the weeks following the confrontation at Riverside Diner, the video of Captain Sarah Mitchell standing her ground against the Iron Vulture's bikers spread like wildfire. Shared millions of times, it sparked heated discussions online and in communities across the country. For Sarah, however, life remained steady. Her focus was on her work at the local Veterans Center, not the sudden notoriety the video had brought her. One afternoon, as Sarah wrapped up a workshop on resume writing for a group of veterans, a familiar figure appeared at the center's door. Jake Razor Thompson, the towering leader of the Iron Vultures, stood awkwardly on the threshold. Gone was the swagger she'd seen at the diner. He looked uncertain, almost nervous, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his leather jacket. "Captain Mitchell," he began, his voice low but steady. "Do you have a minute?" Sarah studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. She gestured toward an empty chair. "Come in, Razor." "Jake," he corrected, sitting down. "My name's Jake." Sarah folded her hands on the desk, waiting for him to speak. Jake glanced around the room, taking in the framed photos of veterans and the bulletin board covered with job postings and community events. He seemed out of place, a man searching for something he couldn't quite define. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he finally said. I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the diner. About what you said." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "What about it?" Jake hesitated, as if the words he wanted to say were stuck in his throat. "My daughter saw the video," he admitted. "Amy. She's 12. She called me crying, asking why her dad was being a bully." The weight of his confession hung between them. Jake's voice cracked slightly as he continued. "That hit me hard. You know? Made me realize I've been showing her the wrong kind of strength. I don't want to be that guy anymore." Sarah's gaze softened, though her tone remained measured. "And what kind of guy do you want to be?" Jake leaned forward, his large hands gripping the edge of the desk. "The kind of guy who protects, not intimidates. The kind of guy who my daughter can be proud of." A long silence followed. Sarah could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability of a man ready to change but unsure how. Change isn't easy, she said finally. It's a choice you have to make every single day. And it's not just about you, it's about the people you surround yourself with. Jake nodded slowly. That's why I'm here. The guys in my crew, they're good men deep down. They just need direction. I was hoping you could help us. Sarah leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. The idea of working with a group like the Iron Vultures was risky. But something about Jake's plea struck a chord. If you're serious about this, there's no half measures. You and your crew will have to commit to rebuilding not just bikes, but yourselves and the community you've hurt. We'll do it, Jake said firmly. Just tell us where to start. And so, the Iron Vultures began their transformation. With Sarah's guidance, the gang rebranded themselves as the Iron Phoenix Riders, a nod to their desire to rise from the ashes of their past. They traded their notorious leather patches for a new emblem, a phoenix rising, symbolizing rebirth and redemption. Their first project was simple but symbolic, restoring old motorcycles for veterans at the center who needed transportation. The work was hard, but it gave the bikers a sense of purpose they hadn't felt in years. As the bikes came to life, so did their hope for a new path. Word spread quickly, and soon other community members were getting involved. Local mechanics volunteered their expertise. Veterans joined as mentors. And even Amy helped by painting designs on the finished bikes. The transformation was slow, but it was real. For Jake, the greatest moment came when he presented a fully restored bike to a young veteran who had been struggling to find work. As the man sat astride the motorcycle, tears in his eyes, Jake felt something he hadn't in years: pride. This is just the beginning, Sarah told him as they watched the veteran ride off. Real strength isn't about intimidation, Jake. It's about lifting others up. The Iron Phoenix Riders were no longer a gang, they were a movement. And for the first time in a long time, Jake believed in the man he was becoming. The Iron Phoenix Riders were no longer the group that once struck fear in the hearts of Jackson's residents. Under Sarah's mentorship, they had become a force for good, channeling their energy into rebuilding the community they had once alienated. What started as a project to restore motorcycles for veterans quickly evolved into something much bigger. It began with small gestures, fixing bikes for neighbors, helping clear debris after a storm, and volunteering at the Veteran Center. But as the riders gained confidence in their new purpose, so did the scope of their efforts. Their former clubhouse, once a symbol of intimidation, was transformed into a community hub. The old pool table and bar were replaced with workbenches, tools, and shelves stocked with donated parts. The space became a sanctuary for anyone in need of support, whether it was a veteran looking for transportation or a single mother needing help with repairs. Jake, now fully embracing his role as a leader, worked tirelessly to rally his crew. He spoke openly about his past mistakes, using them as lessons for his team. "We've all been through dark times," he told them during a meeting one evening. "But that doesn't define us. What matters is what we do now." The riders began partnering with local organizations, hosting events like free repair days for low-income families and workshops to teach teenagers basic mechanical skills. One of their most impactful programs involved mentoring at-risk youth, kids who, like many of the riders, were searching for belonging in the wrong places. One boy, 16-year-old Trevor, stood out among the group. He was quiet and guarded, but Jake saw a spark in him, a reflection of his younger self. During a workshop, Jake handed Trevor a wrench and guided him through fixing an engine. As the bike roared to life, Trevor's expression shifted from apprehension to pride. "You've got a knack for this," Jake said, clapping the boy on the shoulder. "Stick around, and we'll teach you everything you need to know." For Sarah, watching the riders transform wasn't just rewarding, it was deeply personal. She saw in them the resilience and determination she'd witnessed in her fellow Marines. The parallels between their journeys and those of the veterans she worked with reminded her of the universal need for purpose and connection. One day, while helping organize a charity ride to raise funds for the local veteran center. Sarah noticed Amy working alongside the riders. She was painting the emblem of the phoenix on a bike's fuel tank. Her brush strokes steady and confident. "That's a beautiful design," Sarah said, crouching beside her. "Thanks," Amy replied, her voice filled with pride. "It's for a veteran who just got a new job. Dad says this bike will help him get there every day." Sarah smiled. Amy's transformation was just as profound as her father's. The once shy and disillusioned girl now beamed with confidence, inspired by the example her father and the riders were setting. The charity ride itself was a turning point for the community. Hundreds of bikers from neighboring towns joined in, their engines creating a symphony of solidarity. Veterans, families, and locals lined the streets, cheering as the convoy passed. The event raised enough funds to expand the Veteran Center, allowing it to offer new programs like mental health counseling and job placement services. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about the message. The Iron Phoenix riders weren't just fixing bikes, they were rebuilding trust. One act of service at a time. Former skeptics who had once feared them now saw them as protectors and allies. For Jake, the most humbling moment came when Trevor approached him after the ride. "Mr. Thompson," the boy began hesitantly, "can I join the riders someday?" Jake grinned, his voice steady but emotional. "Kid, you're already one of us." That night, as the riders gathered at their clubhouse to celebrate, Sarah looked around the room. The laughter, the camaraderie, and the shared sense of purpose were undeniable. What had once been a symbol of division was now a beacon of hope. "Change is contagious," she thought to herself. "All it takes is one spark to light a fire." The Iron Phoenix riders had found their purpose. But their journey was far from over. As their influence grew, so did their ambition. The small town of Jackson was just the beginning. As the Iron Phoenix riders gained momentum, their impact began to ripple beyond Jackson. Their clubhouse-turned-community hub had become a lifeline for veterans, struggling families, and at-risk youth. But Sarah and Jake knew they could do more. The riders were evolving into something greater, a movement centered on service, redemption, and community building. The question now was how to scale their efforts. The answer came unexpectedly one evening as Sarah sat with Jake in the now bustling clubhouse. They were reviewing the success of their recent programs when a soft knock interrupted them. At the door stood Colonel James Wright, a stoic figure whose worn-out boots and tattered jacket hinted at the harsh reality of his circumstances. "I heard you folks help veterans," he said quietly. His voice carried the weight of a man who had fought battles both overseas and within himself. Sarah rose immediately, extending a hand. "Colonel Wright, welcome. Come in." Over coffee, James shared his story. A decorated Special Forces officer, he had saved countless lives in Afghanistan but struggled to adjust after returning home. The transition to civilian life had been unbearable, and he had ended up homeless, drifting from one city to the next. His journey had brought him to Jackson after hearing about the riders. "I don't need charity," he said firmly. "I need purpose." Those words resonated deeply with Sarah and Jake. That night, they stayed late, sketching out an idea that would redefine the riders' mission. What if their clubhouse model could be replicated as a haven for veterans like James, safe spaces to rebuild their lives, learn new skills, and contribute to their communities? By morning, the blueprint for Phoenix Nests was born. The first Phoenix Nest opened in Detroit, Michigan, a city hit hard by economic decline and home to a large population of homeless veterans. The riders worked tirelessly to convert an abandoned warehouse into a fully functional rehabilitation center. With Sarah's connections and Jake's leadership, the project gained traction. Local businesses donated supplies. Volunteer mechanics offered their expertise. And even the veterans themselves pitched in, painting walls and assembling furniture. Each Phoenix Nest combined housing, job training, and mental health support under one roof. But the heart of the program was the workshop, a place where veterans could learn motorcycle restoration and other trade skills while working together toward a common goal. It wasn't just about fixing bikes, it was about restoring dignity and creating a sense of belonging. Colonel Wright, now the director of the Detroit Nest, became a living testament to the program's success. Once a man who had felt forgotten, he now stood tall, guiding others through the same darkness he had faced. This isn't just a shelter, he explained during an interview with a local news station. It's a second chance. As word of the Phoenix Nests spread, so did requests for new locations. Cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and Houston reached out, eager to establish their own centers. Each nest tailored its programs to the unique needs of its community. In Houston, they focused on disaster relief training, while in Chicago, they offered culinary courses alongside mechanical skills. For Jake, the transformation was deeply personal. The riders were no longer defined by their past mistakes but by the lives they were changing. He often visited the nests, sharing his story and reminding veterans that redemption wasn't just possible, it was powerful. One day, during a visit to the Detroit Nest, Jake watched as a young veteran named Marcus worked on his first bike. The man had come in withdrawn, haunted by memories of his deployment. But as the engine roared to life, his entire demeanor changed. Jake clapped him on the back, a proud grin on his face. "See, told you could do it." Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. "Thanks, Jake. This makes me feel like me again." Sarah, too, found her resolve strengthened with every success. She often reminded the riders that their mission was more than fixing motorcycles or providing housing, it was about showing people their worth and giving them the tools to help others. The Phoenix Nests became a cornerstone of the riders' movement, proving that transformation wasn't just about leaving the past behind, it was about building a future filled with purpose. As more nests opened across the country, the riders realized that their vision was no longer confined to Jackson or even the United States. Their story was just beginning, and the world was starting to take notice. The growth of the Iron Phoenix Riders was nothing short of extraordinary. What had started as a local effort to rebuild lives in Jackson had evolved into a nationwide movement. And now it was attracting attention far beyond the borders of the United States. The riders' success with the Phoenix Nests and their community-driven mission sparked interest from unexpected places. One morning, as Sarah sorted through paperwork at the Veteran Center, Maria, the center's program coordinator, burst into her office holding a laptop. "You need to see this," Maria said, setting the laptop on the desk. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes scanning an email. It was from Kenji Tokahoshi, a former Bosako gang leader from Japan who had seen the viral video of Sarah's confrontation with the Iron Vultures and had been following the riders' progress ever since. Kenji's message was earnest and detailed. He explained how Japan's Bosako motorcycle gangs had grown increasingly isolated from society, much like the riders once had. Inspired by the riders' transformation, Kenji wanted to replicate the Phoenix model in Tokyo, creating a space where former gang members and veterans of Japan's self-defense forces could work together. He's asking for guidance, Maria said. He wants to know how to get started. Sarah's mind raced. It was one thing to expand the riders across the US, where the cultural landscape was familiar, but adapting their model for a place as different as Japan was another challenge entirely. Still, the potential was undeniable. "Let's set up a call," Sarah said, her voice steady with determination. That call marked the beginning of the Rising Sun Riders, a Japanese adaptation of the Phoenix model. Kenji and his team combined the principles of the riders with traditional Japanese values of honor and discipline. They focused on restoring classic Japanese motorcycles and reintegrating veterans into their communities. Within months, their success mirrored that of the riders, and other countries began to take notice. In the United Kingdom, former rocker biker gangs partnered with Royal Marine veterans to form the Heritage Riders. focusing on preserving classic British motorcycles while providing job training and support for struggling veterans. In Brazil, riders' chapters in Rio de Janeiro transformed into Phoenix projects, working with at-risk youth in the city's favelas. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jake found themselves fielding requests from all corners of the globe. Each inquiry came with its own set of challenges: how to adapt the rider's core principles to diverse cultural and social contexts. Yet, despite the differences, the mission remained the same: transforming lives through service and community. One evening, Sarah sat with Jake in the bustling Jackson clubhouse, reviewing reports from their international chapters. A map pinned to the wall showed dots representing each new location. It was dotted with lights across North and South America, Europe, and Asia. "Can you believe this?" Jake asked, shaking his head. "From Jackson to Japan. All because of that night in the diner." Sarah smiled, though her eyes reflected the weight of responsibility she carried. "People want hope, Jake. They want to belong to something that makes them proud. We showed them it's possible, and now they're making it their own." The riders' international growth culminated in a gathering that was both unprecedented and deeply symbolic. In Geneva, Switzerland, representatives from every Phoenix chapter around the world convened for the first International Phoenix Riders Summit. Delegates from Japan, the UK, Brazil, and dozens of other countries shared their experiences, exchanging ideas on how to strengthen their communities. Kenji spoke passionately about how the Rising Sun Riders had helped bridge the gap between Japan's aging veterans and its disillusioned youth. A delegate from South Africa shared how their chapter had brought together veterans from opposing sides of old conflicts to rebuild schools in underserved areas. The most emotional moment came when Marcus, the once withdrawn veteran from the Detroit nest, shared his story. Standing before an audience of hundreds, he spoke of how the riders had saved him from despair and given him a reason to keep going. "You didn't just fix my life," Marcus said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You showed me how to help fix others." The summit ended with a unanimous agreement: the Phoenix Riders weren't just a movement, they were a global force for transformation. Each chapter, no matter where it was located, carried the same message: redemption is possible, and true strength lies in service to others. As Sarah looked around the room filled with people from every corner of the world, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The riders had come so far, yet their journey was far from over. The map on the wall was no longer just a symbol of their growth, it was a promise of the change they would continue to bring to the world. The Iron Phoenix Riders had transformed from a local initiative to a global movement. But their true test of resilience came in the form of a crisis. When Hurricane Ian struck the Gulf Coast, it left devastation in its wake. Entire neighborhoods were submerged, families displaced, and resources stretched thin. The riders, now equipped with chapters across the country, quickly mobilized. Jake was the first to suggest their involvement. "We've got the bikes. We've got the skills. And we've got the people," he said during an emergency meeting at the Jackson clubhouse. "We can go where trucks can't." Sarah agreed without hesitation. The riders had always been about service, and this was an opportunity to prove their commitment on a larger scale. Within hours, the riders had organized a plan. Chapters from Texas, Alabama, and Florida rallied their members, loading motorcycles with medical supplies, non-perishable food, and tools for clearing debris. As the convoy of motorcycles roared into the hurricane-ravaged area, they were met with stunned silence. Residents watched as the riders, clad in their Phoenix patches, began unloading supplies and offering assistance. Jake led a group to clear fallen trees from roads, while Sarah coordinated with local emergency services to identify the most critical needs. One of the first families they helped was a single mother and her 2 young children who had been trapped in their home. Floodwaters had surrounded their house, cutting them off from aid. A group of riders used their motorcycles to navigate the submerged streets, delivering food and a generator to the stranded family. I thought we'd been forgotten, the woman said tearfully as Sarah reassured her. Thank you for coming. But the riders didn't stop at immediate relief. They began setting up temporary repair stations for damaged motorcycles and small vehicles, ensuring that residents had reliable transportation. Colonel James Wright, now a key leader in the Detroit Nest, flew down to train local riders in disaster response techniques, sharing strategies he had developed during his military career. The impact of the riders' efforts didn't go unnoticed. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting images of the Phoenix emblem across the nation. Headlines read, "Bikers bring hope to hurricane victims." For many, it was the first time they saw motorcycle clubs portrayed as protectors rather than threats. As the days turned into weeks, the riders' efforts evolved. They partnered with FEMA and the Red Cross, creating a seamless network of support. Sarah worked closely with local officials to streamline their operations, ensuring resources reached the hardest-hit areas. One evening, as Sarah sat by a campfire with a group of exhausted riders, Jake handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "You know," he said, "we've done a lot of good since that night in the diner. But this feels different." Sarah nodded, gazing into the flickering flames. "It's because we're not just fixing things, we're helping people rebuild their lives." The riders' work in the Gulf Coast became a model for disaster response. Recognizing the potential of their unique approach, FEMA invited Sarah and Jake to a national conference on emergency preparedness. There, they presented their strategy, combining local knowledge, mobility, and a focus on community empowerment. But it wasn't just government agencies taking notice. Across the world, other Phoenix chapters began adapting the riders' disaster response model. In Japan, the Rising Sun Riders applied their expertise to earthquake-prone areas, developing specialized rescue techniques. In Brazil, the Rio Riders focused on delivering aid during annual flooding. The riders' ability to act swiftly and effectively wasn't just about their motorcycles, it was about the trust they had built within their communities. Residents didn't just see them as responders, they saw them as neighbors and allies. One particularly memorable moment came when a young boy approached Jake while he was clearing debris, clutching a toy motorcycle. The boy looked up and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Jake crouched down, his voice thick with emotion. "You can be, kid. You just have to remember, real strength is about helping others." As the Gulf Coast began to recover, the riders returned to their respective chapters, exhausted but proud. For Sarah, the experience reinforced what she had always believed: service isn't just about the moments of crisis, it's about the connections you build and the hope you leave behind. The hurricane response was a turning point for the Phoenix Riders. They had proven their ability to mobilize on a massive scale. And in doing so, they had redefined what it meant to be a motorcycle club. They weren't just riders anymore, they were protectors, builders, and a beacon of hope for communities in need. And as they prepared for their next challenge, one thing was clear: the world was watching. As the Phoenix Riders gained recognition for their disaster response efforts, another unexpected opportunity presented itself, one that would test their principles on an entirely new level. A request came from the United Nations. Two rival factions in a conflict-ridden area in the Middle East had seen the riders' work and wanted their help in mediating peace. "They've watched what we've done with rival motorcycle clubs," Sarah explained to the riders during a meeting at their Jackson clubhouse. "If we can get former enemies to work together here, they believe we can do it there." Jake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "We're bikers, Sarah, not diplomats. This is way out of our league." "Maybe," Sarah replied calmly, "but what we've learned isn't about politics or diplomacy. It's about showing people that cooperation can be stronger than conflict. That's something anyone can understand." After much discussion, the riders agreed to try. Jake, Sarah, and Maria traveled to Geneva to meet with representatives from the United Nations and the rival factions. They were joined by Kenji from Japan and Marcus from Detroit, each bringing unique perspectives on rebuilding trust and fostering unity. The conflict was decades old, rooted in generations of mistrust and violence. Both sides had suffered immeasurable losses, and the scars ran deep. Yet, sitting across from each other in a neutral meeting room, the two leaders seemed willing, if hesitant, to consider a different path. Before any discussions began, Sarah insisted on showing a montage of the riders' work. It featured rival bikers rebuilding motorcycles together, veterans finding new purpose, and communities transformed by acts of service. The final frame showed Jake standing in a rebuilt Gulf Coast neighborhood, handing the keys to a repaired bike to a hurricane survivor. "These aren't just stories," Sarah said, addressing the room. "They're proof that people can change when they focus on what unites them instead of what divides them." The leaders watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. Then one of them, a grizzled elder who had lost his son to the conflict, spoke. "It is easier to repair machines than to repair people." "True," Jake replied, his voice steady. "But repairing machines can teach people how to repair themselves." It was a pivotal moment. Sarah proposed a radical idea. Instead of beginning with peace talks, the two factions would collaborate on a tangible project, rebuilding a school in a devastated village. The school, once a symbol of the community's future, had been reduced to rubble during the conflict. Reconstructing it together would force the two sides to work side by side, creating a foundation of trust through shared purpose. At first, progress was slow. Both sides eyed each other warily as they cleared debris and laid bricks. But as the days passed, something remarkable happened. Conversations began, tentative at first, then more open. One morning, a young man from one faction handed a hammer to an older man from the other, saying simply, "We need more hands." Kenji played a key role in fostering these moments, drawing from his experience with the Rising Sun Riders. He organized joint meals, where workers shared stories over rice and tea. Maria facilitated workshops on conflict resolution, teaching practical tools for communication and understanding. By the time the school was completed, the transformation was undeniable. The project had become more than just a building, it was a symbol of what could be achieved when people put aside their differences to work toward a common goal. The opening ceremony drew international attention. Children from both factions ran through the halls of the newly rebuilt school, their laughter echoing through the village. For many, it was the first time they had seen hope replace hostility. Standing together at the ceremony, the rival leaders addressed the crowd. "We came here as enemies," one of them said, his voice thick with emotion. "But today, we leave as partners." The success of the project sparked a ripple effect. Other communities in the region began reaching out, asking for help in starting similar initiatives. The United Nations formally recognized the Phoenix Riders as a peacebuilding organization, and their methods were studied by conflict resolution experts worldwide. Back in Jackson, the riders watched the ceremony through a live stream. Jake shook his head in amazement. From fixing bikes to fixing wars. Who would have thought? Sarah smiled, her heart full. "It's all the same. Jake. You start small. Show people what's possible, and let them take it from there." The riders' work in the Middle East became a blueprint for peace mediation. Just as they had transformed rival bikers into allies, they had shown that even the deepest divisions could be bridged when people worked together to build, rather than destroy. The Phoenix Riders had proven their message wasn't limited to motorcycles or veterans. It was a universal truth. True strength comes not from dominance, but from cooperation, empathy, and the courage to create something better together. The success of the Phoenix Riders in mediating peace solidified their reputation as more than just a motorcycle group. They had become a global symbol of transformation. From disaster response to rebuilding war-torn communities, the riders proved that their principles could adapt to any challenge. But with their growing influence came even greater responsibilities. One evening in Jackson, Sarah gathered her core team in the now iconic clubhouse. Jake, Maria, Marcus, Kenji, and Colonel Wright were joined via video call by leaders from Phoenix chapters across the globe. A world map covered one wall, dotted with pins representing every active chapter. The room buzzed with anticipation. "We've done incredible things," Sarah began, her voice steady but firm. "But the challenges we're facing now are bigger than anything we've tackled before. It's time to think about how we take this movement to the next level." Maria pulled up a presentation showing statistics that underscored the riders' impact. Veteran suicide rates had dropped by 22% in communities with Phoenix nests, and areas with active chapters saw a 30% reduction in gang violence. But Maria also highlighted the gaps. "We're reaching thousands," she said, "but there are millions who still need help." Kenji spoke next, sharing how the Rising Sun Riders in Japan had developed training programs for earthquake-prone regions. "We've learned that the key to sustainability is empowering local leaders. We don't just teach people to ride or repair bikes, we teach them to lead." The group agreed, expanding their reach would require a scalable model. They decided to launch a leadership initiative, Phoenix Leaders, to train individuals who could bring the riders' mission to underserved areas. This program would focus on teaching the core principles of service, empathy, and collaboration, tailored to different cultural and social contexts. The first cohort of Phoenix Leaders included a mix of veterans, former gang members, and community organizers from 15 countries. The training was held in Geneva, blending hands-on workshops with lessons in conflict resolution, disaster response, and community building. Sarah and Jake led the program, sharing their own stories to inspire the next generation of leaders. One trainee, Aisha, stood out. A former refugee from Syria, she had seen firsthand the devastation of war and the resilience of those who survived. "The Phoenix Riders showed me that strength isn't about who you've fought," she said during her graduation speech, "but about who you've helped." Aisha returned to her home country and launched the first Phoenix chapter in the Middle East, focusing on rebuilding schools and supporting displaced families. Her success inspired other leaders to follow suit, and soon Phoenix chapters were springing up in regions as diverse as Kenya, India, and Eastern Europe. Back in Jackson, the local riders worked tirelessly to support these international efforts while continuing their work at home. Trevor, the once quiet teenager who had found his place among the riders, had grown into a confident young man, now a full-fledged member. He spearheaded a mentorship program for at-risk youth, helping them channel their energy into constructive projects. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the riders," Trevor said during a community event. "They didn't just teach me how to fix bikes, they taught me how to believe in myself." The riders' influence even began to shape policy. In Washington, a bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced the Phoenix Act, legislation designed to fund veteran support programs based on the riders' model. The bill passed with overwhelming support, providing resources to expand Phoenix nests and launch new community initiatives nationwide. Despite their growing acclaim, the riders never lost sight of their roots. At the end of every day, Sarah, Jake, and the core team would gather at Riverside Diner, their sanctuary. Over steaming cups of coffee, they reflected on their journey and planned for the road ahead. One evening, as the diner bustled with families, veterans, and riders, Betty approached Sarah with her ever-present coffee pot. "You know, honey," Betty said with a smile, "this place has seen a lot of history, but nothing like what you've built." Sarah glanced around the diner, her heart swelling with pride. "We didn't build it alone," she said. "It's the people, the riders, the veterans, the families. They're the ones who made this possible." As the sun set over Jackson, its golden light streaming through the diner windows, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The Phoenix Riders had risen far beyond their humble beginnings, but their mission remained the same: to transform lives, uplift communities, and prove that even the most broken wings could learn to fly. And as the world continued to watch, the riders prepared for their next challenge, because the road ahead was long. And there were always more lives to lift, more bridges to build, and more fires to ignite in the hearts of those who needed it most. The phoenix had risen, and its wings stretched across the globe. As the Phoenix Riders continue their incredible journey, their story reminds us that change begins with courage. One small act of kindness can ripple into a wave of transformation. From rebuilding lives in a small-town diner to uniting communities across the globe, they have proven that strength is not about domination but about lifting others. Their legacy lives on in the hearts of veterans, families, and communities who now carry the torch of hope and resilience. Every restored motorcycle, every rebuilt school, every life touched is a testament to the power of service and unity. The story of the Phoenix Riders isn't just about them, it's about all of us and the difference we can make when we stand together. Thank you for being part of this journey. Subscribe to Life Stories and join us next time for another tale of extraordinary transformation and the enduring spirit of humanity.